What are the pros and cons of working in consulting? My name is Luke. I spent 3 years working at a management consulting firm, and I'll tell you, I found a lot of pros, but let's go through the list and we can talk about each one of these individually. So number one, you get exposure to a lot of different industries and a lot of different capabilities. Consulting firms are typically structured as a matrix where you have industries and capabilities. And at most generalist-oriented firms, you will get exposure to all these different verticals and all these different capabilities. So if you are fresh out of undergrad or fresh out of MBA and don't have an exact idea of an industry you want to move into, consulting is a great way to get exposure to learn the culture of different industries and see what excites you and see what gives you passion and see what really makes you excited to show up to work. Consulting firms have a very feedback-oriented culture. I worked at Bain. Bain has a awesome feedback culture. For example, I had coffee chats or professional development chats with my manager every 2 weeks, and they would tell you, this is what's going well. These are areas for improvement. These are things you should focus on to improve your career. This is common of almost any consulting firm where it's a culture of feedback and investing in their own human capital, which is their most valuable resource. So you can come out of consulting with the most honed toolkit you can have. Next, this is firm by firm. I found the people I worked with were great, and I found had a lot of interest both in work and were very smart and very intelligent, but were also great people that had interests outside of work and like to go hiking, like to bike ride on weekends, like to travel. They like to do things besides work and besides, really only care about getting work done. This is a huge bonus and something you'll see is really, really valuable is being able to have a conversation with something that is outside of work. So work-life balance, I find people complain about work-life balance at consulting firms. I actually think it's really good. And there are certainly some cases where it isn't great, but for the most part, it's actually pretty solid, particularly in consolidating your work to the weeks. I never worked weekends. Maybe I did, an hour of work like once in my full 3 years of consulting. For the most part, you'll probably work 50 to 60 hours during the week. So that's Monday to Friday. My personal perspective is for the compensation and the work-life balance, it is an excellent trade-off for anyone seeking to enter consulting. Probably one of the biggest upsides of consulting are the exit opportunities. You can transition from consulting to almost any industry or capability. You can go into tech. You can go into a strategy role. You can go into operations. You can go into general management. You can break into some finance roles depending on the capability, but there is a broad array of different exit opportunities which you can leave consulting into. What is particularly attractive is to do an MBA, 2 years of top management consulting, and then transition into industry at a more senior level than you would had you started at that industry in the beginning. The career progression in consulting is accelerated, and in my opinion, will give you a greater breadth of options to exit into compared to other career paths. Think about investment banking. Chances are if you work in investment banking, you are going to exit into a private equity role or in corporate finance or in corporate development doing M&A for a company. You can obviously do other things coming from investment banking, but the skill set you learn in consulting is more applicable to different capabilities and different industries than many other professions. And lastly, there are really clear norms and progression for moving through the different roles at a consulting firm. And they'll tell you, this is what you need to do to get promoted. These are the areas of development for you to focus on in the next 6 months. And if you do these 3 things, you will be successful. We're at some industry firms, at some less structured firms, you really don't know when you're going to be promoted. You really don't know what you need to do necessarily to get promoted. So if you are someone that loves structure, and that is a J on the MBTI scale, you will love consulting, and you will find the structure and the visibility and the transparency in your career progression very, very valuable. So that was a lot of the pros. I'll talk about the cons now. One con is you do have less financial upside. Most of these firms are structured as partnerships, so you won't really get significant options or significant equity that could be worth a lot. If you work for a startup, if you work for even some tech companies, maybe 2 years ago, there's a lot of upside in getting stock options that could potentially appreciate and be worth a lot of money that are difficult to value today. At a consulting firm, you'll get good compensation, but you won't have significant financial upside that you may see at smaller organizations or if you wanted to found your own business. Next one is you will get less exposure to a financial toolkit, which isn't to say you won't work on financial topics. You still might build a discounted cash flow model. You still might do valuation work. You still will probably build a revenue forecast, but you won't have the same exposure to everyday financial models that you would in, say, investment banking or even a FP&A role. And so if you are trying to break into a financial role, say get into private equity or say break into those roles later in your career, it will be more challenging. And that's not to say you can't do it. I certainly made the transition from consulting to private equity, and it takes work. You do need to spend time understanding basic accounting. You do need a refresher on that financial toolkit, but you should be aware that for future roles, you will be stress test more on understanding that financial toolkit than if you had come from investment banking or some more financially focused role. I found it is sometimes more difficult to feel ownership in a specific project because you can feel somewhat removed from the actual implications of your work. So if you're working on a go-to-market strategy or you're working even on a private equity deal, you do your analysis, you present your report, and then you go do something else, right? You go work on a new project and never really see ultimately what happens with that, right? Like you may get an email a couple months later that's, oh, this deal closed, or this happened due to our analysis, which is really cool. But there is a separation between your actual work and seeing results that you do get in other jobs, where if you work in private equity, you actually get to purchase the company and then you get to own the company and you get to see the results of what you're doing. Or if you work in industry and you work on a new product that is being brought to market, you get to see how that product rolls out at market and you get to own the implications and get to really lean in and feel the ownership of your work. This is especially true as you get to more senior levels. When you are recruiting for executive level positions, there's benefit to having owned a P&L at some point and having to make real decisions that impact, is this business going to be successful or not? And in consulting, you're an advisor. You are a thought partner that is enabling someone else to make informed and thoughtful decisions. Final con here, and this is actually a little bit of a pro and a con, is variable team structure and variable supervisor. If you have worked in almost any job, you can probably figure out that the sustainability or the enjoyment of your job is heavily dependent on your relationship with your supervisor. If you like your supervisor or your manager, you're probably going to have a good time. If not, it's like that old South Park meme, you're going to have a bad time and it's not going to be a great experience for you. One of the nice parts about consulting is you change teams maybe about every 4 to 6 months. Obviously, depending on the firm, depending on the case, a bunch of other variables that come into play here. What that means is if you're in a team that you don't like, you get to go and work with some other team and see what you do like. The downside is it's hard to find a very repeatable team that you always get to work with. Because even if you find yourself in a position where you love working for someone and you love working in a specific team, there's a chance that team rolls over, or they might not have a case that is sold the next time you are up for staffing, or a number of different reasons why you can't just work with one specific team. Many other jobs will offer you the opportunity to interview directly with your supervisor, your manager, and then potentially your manager's manager to ensure you are a good fit with that specific team, that your personalities will match, and that it will be a good fit for your working relationship. In consulting, you might not ever meet your direct supervisor during the interview process. Honestly, chances are you actually will not. I have found that many people in consulting are excellent supervisors, excellent managers, and generally pleasant people to work with. But one downside to be conscious of is that you will not have a direct exposure to who you will be working for. These are my perspectives on the pros and cons of consulting. There are obviously many different ones, and everyone will have a different experience and different benefits and downsides to consider. If there are any key ones that you feel I missed, please comment them below. Otherwise, if you are interested in more consulting content, please check out the other videos on this playlist and content on our channel. Thank you.